In the Sage's formula, you will learn how to silence the voices of fear and doubt that hold you back. Through powerful real-life stories, this book will guide you to reclaim your inner strength and transform your life. The Sage's formula. There's a secret every sage knows. A formula that doesn't just change lives but transforms them from the inside out. It's not some mystical, unattainable concept. It's simple, practical, and grounded in the everyday choices you make. It's a formula for inner mastery, peace, and purpose. But most people don't recognize it, because fear, doubt, and limiting beliefs drown out its quiet, steady call. The Sage's formula isn't about following someone else's path. It's about uncovering the one you were always meant to walk. This book isn't for those who want easy answers or shallow promises. It's for those who are ready to face their deepest fears, break the patterns holding them back, and awaken the wisdom already within them. It's time to stop living as if you're just a player in the world's script. This book will guide you to write your own with clarity, courage, and unshakable belief. So let's begin the journey. Not to find the answers, but to discover that the answers have always been inside of you. Chapter 1. The Weight of Silence. David sat in his downtown Chicago office, the skyline stretching wide behind him. From the outside he had everything. Corner office, polished shoes, a title that made people stand a little straighter. But inside his chest felt like a collapsing tunnel. Meetings blurred together, deadlines roared like engines, and he hadn't laughed, genuinely laughed, in months. The pressure didn't break him all at once. It chipped at him slowly, until one Thursday morning, David walked into the office, turned off his phone, and never turned it back on. He didn't quit. He didn't crash. He vanished. For 90 days, David unplugged from everything. No social media, no news, no phone, no noise. He stayed in a lakeside cabin a few hours from the city. No Wi-Fi, no schedule, no one to impress. The first week, the silence screamed at him. He wrestled with guilt, with the fear of being forgotten, with the echo of his identity crumbling. But then something unexpected happened. Clarity returned. He noticed the wind again. He heard his own thoughts without interruption. By day 30, David was writing in a notebook every morning. Nothing profound, just feelings. But the simplicity healed him. He realized he'd been living for recognition, not alignment. He'd chased noise, not meaning. When David returned to the city, nothing looked the same. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. He stepped down from his VP role, took a consulting job that allowed flexibility, and started volunteering on weekends. For the first time since college, he felt alive. He said one thing changed everything. When I stopped performing, I started listening, and what I heard was me. Clarity creates power, but that power is buried under the noise we confuse for life. You don't need a cabin in the woods to hear your inner voice, but you do need intentional stillness. The world is loud, and that noise convinces us that busyness is purpose. But busyness without clarity is just exhaustion with a title. Silence feels uncomfortable at first because it confronts what we've ignored, our doubts, our dreams, our truth. But when you sit with it long enough, silence becomes a sanctuary. That's where the formula begins, when you stop talking and start tuning in. Today, carve out 15 minutes of pure silence. No music, no phone, no conversation. Just sit. Breathe. Feel. Let the noise rise and don't chase it. Your only task, listen. Ask yourself, what am I pretending not to know? Do this every day for the next 7 days. Clarity doesn't come in chaos. It comes in the quiet. Because clarity creates power. and silence is where it begins. Chapter 2. The Mirror Holds Truth. Maria, 29, from New Mexico, had always dismissed dreams as nonsense, nothing more than the leftover chatter of the mind. But on a cold October night something shifted. She had gone to bed drained, weary from yet another argument with her mother about the same thing they'd been fighting over for years: control. That night, her dream didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a memory. She stood in a quiet hallway lined with mirrors, but none of them showed her reflection. Instead, each one replayed moments she'd buried. Her snapping at her younger brother when he asked for help. Her guilt when she ghosted a friend who opened up about depression. Her tight-lipped silence when her mother said, "You always shut down." She ran past mirror after mirror, hoping the images would disappear. But at the end of the hallway stood a final mirror. This one showed her finally, face still, eyes wide, but behind her stood a young girl. A younger version of herself, maybe 8 or 9 years old, hugging herself, afraid to speak. The child whispered only one thing: "You keep pretending you don't see me." Maria woke up shaking, not crying, shaking. That morning, for the first time in years, she didn't open Instagram. She sat in silence, then walked to her bathroom. Mirror. She looked at herself, not the filtered version, not the socially acceptable one, but the face of someone exhausted from pretending. The dream was clear. She had inherited her mother's fear of vulnerability and had turned it into a weapon of survival. But now it was her prison. That day Maria wrote a letter to her mom, not to blame her, but to say, "I finally see what I've been hiding from, and I want us to break this cycle together." She never mailed the letter. She didn't need to. The real breakthrough was admitting the truth to herself. Not for her mom, for the little girl in the mirror. Truth doesn't shout. It waits in silence. And when you finally face it, it frees you. That is the beginning of the sage's formula: facing what you've been running from, not with judgment but with unshakable honesty. Maria didn't need anyone to validate her anymore. She had done the one thing most people avoid for a lifetime. She stopped lying to herself. Clarity creates power. When you finally look in the mirror and stop flinching, your power returns, not in arrogance but in awareness. That awareness is the starting point of transformation. Stand in front of a mirror. No phone, no distractions. Ask one question out loud. What am I pretending not to know? Breathe. Let the silence speak. Write down what comes up without editing. Don't judge it. Just witness it. That's the mirror moment, and it's the doorway to your truth. Chapter 3. Your Name Is Not Your Noise. Atlanta, Georgia. The courtroom smelled like stale coffee and cold ambition. Jamal Washington, 44, stood before a federal judge, suited in navy wool and weighed down by something heavier than case files: his own identity. The courtroom had been his battlefield for 20 years. He won most of the time. Clients clapped him on the back, partners nodded with pride, and his bank account padded itself into a quiet fortress. But inside, something had collapsed. Each morning he stared into the mirror and asked himself the question no one else dared. Who am I without this suit? It wasn't burnout. It was awakening. Jamal remembered the first time he felt this fracture. It was at his daughter's school art fair. He stood before her painting of a black man floating in a sea of white fog. "That's you, Daddy," she said. "You look like you're trying to shout, but nobody can hear you." Jamal laughed it off then. But that night, alone, he sat in his car for an hour staring at the dashboard, realizing My child sees me drowning in a version of myself I didn't choose. He had spent his life becoming the first in his family to graduate college, the first black partner at his firm, the first to buy a house in the part of Atlanta where valet parking came with the grocery store. But none of it felt like his. It was a performance he perfected, not a purpose he lived. So he left. Quietly. No fireworks, no scandal. Just a resignation letter and a refusal to wear a mask one more day. He traded his tailored suits for linen shirts. He studied meditation, African spiritual traditions, and poetry. He began mentoring young men from his old neighborhood, not from a pedestal, but from eye level. The Jamal who once controlled a courtroom now sat cross-legged in community centers, teaching boys how to breathe through pain. One day an old colleague asked, "Don't you miss being someone?" Jamal smiled. "I didn't stop being someone. I finally stopped being everyone else. Our culture wraps us in names that aren't ours. Successful, lazy, strong, too emotional, boss, failure. Labels are loud. They echo through our families, our jobs, even our mirrors. But your soul isn't a resume or a reputation. It's a whisper beneath the noise, waiting to be heard." What Jamal discovered is this: you are not the expectations placed on you. You are not the version of yourself someone applauded. You are the energy that exists when all performances fall away. The sage's formula teaches this truth. Clarity creates power. And clarity begins the moment you detach from the roles you didn't choose. If you've been clinging to an identity that's killing your spirit just to please others, this is your invitation. Let it go. The version of you that earns applause may not be the version of you that feels peace. Go somewhere quiet. No phone, no music, just stillness. Close your eyes. Ask yourself, who am I beneath what I do? Who am I beneath what they want me to be? Now list 5 labels others have placed on you. Tear them apart, mentally or on paper. Then write one word that feels like your real name. Not your birth name, your soul name. Keep it private. Let it remind you. Your truth is not for performance. It's for peace. Because when you shed the noise, you'll hear the whisper that always belonged to you. Clarity creates power. Chapter 4. Fear is a liar. With a mic. Tasha, 33, sat motionless on the cold bathroom tile of her Detroit apartment, her breath short and shaky, hands gripping the sink like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. She had canceled yet another client session, not because she didn't care, but because fear had once again wrapped itself around her chest like a tightening wire. For years, anxiety had followed her like a shadow with a megaphone, loud, demanding, convincing. Every time she tried to rise into her calling as a trauma coach, that voice would flare up. "You'll mess it up. You're not ready. Who do you think you are?" But one night, curled beneath a weighted blanket with only her cracked journal and fatigue for company, she scrawled a phrase that struck like thunder. Fear is a liar with a mic. That sentence didn't just sound poetic. It felt like a lifeline. The next morning, she began a strange ritual. She wrote down the lies fear told her, then responded out loud like a woman reclaiming her voice. "You're wrong. That's not my story anymore. You don't get to decide." Slowly, the voice in her head got quieter. She stopped trying to be fearless and started acting like fear had no authority. Her turning point came during a session with a trembling teenage girl. Tasha didn't freeze. She leaned in, spoke gently, and heard her own calm voice echo louder than fear ever had. That's when she knew. She wasn't healing in spite of her anxiety. She was healing because she had faced it. Fear had been loud, but it had never been the truth. And now she was teaching others how to flip the mic. Chapter 5. What you allow, you repeat. Lena, 27, sat in the quiet of her Miami apartment, staring at her reflection in the living room window. For 7 years, she had been trapped in a relationship that mirrored the pain of her parents' broken marriage. Constant arguments, silent treatments, and a toxic push-pull dynamic that seemed impossible to escape. It wasn't love. It was a cycle. Every time she tried to leave, fear gripped her heart. Fear of being alone, fear of being misunderstood, and fear of repeating history. But one night, after another tear-filled argument, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, exhausted and small. She saw the woman she used to be, the one who had dreams, the one who could laugh without guilt. That woman had been buried under the weight of compromise, but she wasn't gone. Lena knew that if she kept allowing the toxic behavior, she would keep repeating the same pain. She decided it was time to break the cycle. The next day she left. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect, but it was the first time in years that she had taken control of her life. It was the first time she set a boundary. She didn't just walk away from a relationship. She walked toward herself. Setting boundaries, she realized, wasn't about controlling others. It was about teaching them how to treat her. And that act of self-respect unlocked a freedom she never thought possible. Lena's healing didn't come from waiting for change. It came from being the one to change. In the months that followed, she built a new foundation of self-worth, never repeating the mistakes of the past. Chapter 6. Desire is a divine clue. Andre, 41, from Oakland, sat in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the canvas in front of him. The brushes sat untouched, as they had for the past 2 decades. He had buried his love for art under the weight of a 20-year finance career that promised security, but never fulfillment. Every day his inner voice, quiet but persistent, whispered, "You were meant to create, not count numbers." For years he ignored it, thinking that desire was just an inconvenient distraction. But the whispers only grew louder, and one day, after yet another soul-draining meeting at work, he finally listened. Andre picked up a paintbrush and dipped it into colors he hadn't seen in years. The first stroke felt like an awakening. His heart opened as the canvas became a map of his soul's forgotten path. He realized that his desire to paint wasn't a whim. It was a divine clue, guiding him to where he was always meant to be. He didn't quit his job overnight, but he began setting aside time every evening to reconnect with his art. Slowly, the paintings piled up, each piece speaking a deeper truth about who he was becoming. Andre began to share his work with others, and what followed was an outpouring of recognition, not just for his art but for his courage to trust the divine nudge of his desires. His soul had been speaking all along, and when he finally listened, it led him to a life that felt both true and limitless. Chapter 7. Belief bends reality. Ava, 35, from Denver, had spent years hearing the same thing from doctors. There's nothing more we can do. Her chronic illness, which left her bedridden and in constant pain, baffled medical professionals. She tried everything: medication, therapy, special diets, but nothing worked. It was during one of her darkest nights, unable to sleep in her sterile hospital bed, that she first heard a whisper that would change everything. What if your body already knows how to heal? It wasn't a voice from outside, it came from within. A deep knowing part of her believed that the body's capacity for healing was more than just biology. It was energy, faith, and the mind's power. From that moment on, she dedicated herself to the practice of visualization, seeing herself strong, healthy, and walking through the mountains of Colorado again. Every morning, she would close her eyes and vividly imagine each part of her body rejuvenating, her cells transforming, and her energy restoring. Her belief didn't just feel hopeful, it felt real. And over time, her symptoms began to ease. Her recovery was slow but undeniable. Doctors were puzzled, but Ava knew the truth. Belief wasn't just a mental shift, it was a physical one. It was the invisible force that guided her cells to heal, guided her body to remember how to thrive. She didn't just bend reality with her mind, she became proof that belief can rewrite the body's story. Chapter 8. Peace is a choice, not a gift. Omar, 50, sat in his prison cell in Brooklyn. The hum of fluorescent lights above and the distant sounds of shouting guards outside doing little to quiet the storm inside him. For years he'd lived a life of anger, revenge, and blame, each moment driven by the chaos that seemed to follow him like a shadow. But it was in that stark, concrete cell that he realized something. Peace wasn't something that happened to people. It was something you chose. Every day the noise of the world and his past mistakes pressed in on him. But Omar discovered that when he chose to silence the noise, when he stopped giving his thoughts power, peace emerged. Not as a gift, but as a conscious act. He'd seen the men around him, consumed by their bitterness, letting the outside world dictate their peace. But Omar started a practice that changed everything. Each morning he'd close his eyes, block out the chaos, and sit in stillness. At first it was uncomfortable. His mind raced, his body ached. But with time, he found an inner quiet he'd never known before. It wasn't an escape from reality. It was a new way to meet it. When his sentence was over and he walked free into the streets of Brooklyn, the world hadn't changed, but Omar had. Peace was no longer a fleeting moment. He carried it with him like a quiet strength. He realized the loudest storms had nothing on the calm that came from choosing peace in the middle of chaos. In a quiet moment, whether it's 2 minutes or 20, close your eyes and focus on your breath. Let go of everything. The noise, the worry, the thoughts of the past or future. Just breathe. Peace isn't found in the absence of noise, but in your ability to create stillness within it. Practice this daily, and make it your anchor. Chapter 9. Let go or be dragged. Erin, 31, stood at the edge of her bed in her Seattle apartment, staring at the cluttered life she'd spent years building, a life that, for all its comforts, felt like it was suffocating her. She had always prided herself on control, on creating order in the chaos of her work, her relationships, and her future. But at some point, the tight grip she held on everything became a prison. Her body was showing the signs: constant tension, sleepless nights, and an ever-present feeling of exhaustion. One evening, after another argument with her partner and an overwhelming flood of anxiety, Erin finally hit her breaking point. As she sat on the floor, tears running down her face, the thought struck her: I can't keep holding on to this. It wasn't just the relationship, it was everything. The idea that she needed to control every outcome, every decision, every single piece of her life, had drained her. What if letting go, instead of holding tighter, was the key? The next morning, Erin took a deep breath and made the decision. She was going to release control. She started small, by letting go of perfectionism at work, then by easing up on her need to control how others saw her. Slowly, the weight lifted. Opportunities flowed effortlessly. She reconnected with her creative side, found a new job she loved, and even experienced a newfound peace in her relationship. Her life didn't fall apart as she had feared. It realigned. The moment she stopped dragging the past behind her, she started moving forward again. Letting go wasn't giving up. It was stepping into a freedom she didn't know she had been missing. Pick one thing today that you've been holding on to, whether it's a belief, a relationship, or a goal, and say this aloud. I release, you and I let go. Allow yourself to feel the weight lift even if just for a moment. Do this every day and watch how the pressure starts to ease. Chapter 10. The Sage Within You. Tyson, 46, from Phoenix, stood at the front of the room, facing a group of eager faces who looked to him for guidance. Years ago, his life had been nothing but chaos, addiction, loss, and the gnawing sense of being trapped in a cycle he couldn't escape. He had lived in a fog, believing that external forces dictated his life, his past, his failures, his family history. But one night, after hitting rock bottom, Tyson had an epiphany. He found himself sitting in a dimly lit room, struggling with his cravings when a voice, calm, steady, and surprisingly familiar, whispered within him, "You already know what to do. You just haven't listened." That was the moment Tyson realized the wisdom he sought wasn't outside of him. It was already there, buried beneath years of noise and distraction. He started to cultivate a practice of listening to his own inner voice, the voice of the sage that had always resided within him. Over time, his addiction faded, replaced by inner mastery, clarity, peace, and the wisdom to guide others. Now, as a coach teaching people to tap into their own inner wisdom, Tyson had become a living example of transformation. He understood that we all have the sage within us. We just need to clear away the layers of fear and doubt to hear its voice. The more he taught, the more he saw his students shift, transforming from confusion and self-doubt into confident, empowered beings. The sage wasn't something to search for externally. It was always within, waiting to be awakened. Take a moment each day to sit quietly, close your eyes, and listen. Ask yourself, what do I already know? Trust the first answer that comes. Let that answer guide you, no matter how small it may seem. You are your own sage, and the wisdom you seek is always within. Conclusion. As you close this book, remember that the wisdom you've discovered isn't just words on pages. It's a living, breathing truth inside you. The formula to unlocking your power, transforming your fears, and embracing your purpose has always been yours. The ancient sages didn't hold secrets locked away in dusty scrolls. They understood that the key to life's mysteries lies in the most human parts of us. Our struggles, our growth, and our ability to choose every day to live with clarity. Clarity creates power, and now you know how to wield it. Whether it's flipping the mic on fear, stepping into your true identity, or releasing what no longer serves you, the practices are simple, but profound. Your journey doesn't end with this book. It begins with each action you take from here. Trust in your ability to write your own formula, day by day. The sage you've been searching for has always been within. Step forward, knowing that every decision rooted in clarity is a step closer to your authentic power.